Now that we feel more obligated to find our place in paths of good, the path of Mount Sinai conveyed the Torah, and through that powerful nevuah, the word of Hashem Yisbarach, of the Almighty Creator, to Moshe Rabbeinu, to the superlative prophet Moses, we have a path of 613 mitzvahs charged to the nation of Israel and 7 universal commandments to all sons of Noach, all mankind. And therefore, as we gain clarity for the universal message of morality, let us sense those lessons. We've already discussed belief in the Creator, that we can see Him through the beautiful acts of creation and nature, and His charge to believe in Him as one who intervened in history, that did not merely create the world and put it on automatic, but rather intervenes in bringing Israel out of Egypt, and doing it for reasons of divine moral judgment, to make the path of monotheism clearly victorious over evil, oppressive polytheism. So belief in God is a theme that pervades the 7 mitzvahs. And now if we appreciate the sacrifice of those soldiers in the Allied armies that liberated the camps, they did not spring up as loose vigilantes from their residences, but they were gathered by nations who governed their countries with laws. And so we view one of the 7 mitzvahs, and that is for mankind to set up systems of judgment and justice to enforce law. It is interesting to note biblically that when the nation and people of Shechem perpetrated an abduction of an innocent person and did not bring them to justice, they were regarded by the great leaders of tribes, Shimon and Levi, as guilty of the crime for not bringing it to justice when they could have. And so it is important to appreciate the Nazis that were brought to judgment at Nuremberg, to attest that systems of justice must conform to the principles of divine morality and cannot be invented. But we should also be fearful and pained by the lack of justice where so many perpetrators of evil were not brought to judgment. So we view and appreciate the path of justice, of enforcing punishment for crime. And now let's discuss others of the 7 universal commandments. Others of the 7 universal commandments include not to murder, the sanctity of human life, which is essential to appreciating the divine spark in every person. The Almighty created man and sparked from His own soul. So there's a spark of divine in each person. And so when we believe in God, we appreciate the greatness of each human being. And therefore, we appreciate the weight of the crime of murder. And now we understand why the regimes that were polytheistic or believed one people was spawned from a divine race and the other not, could legislate license to murder. And now the next of the 7 universal commandments we will discuss is the commandment not to engage in idolatry. And we view how the Nazi regime worshipped its leader, worshipped the blood in its own veins as believing it flowed from divine beings from the Nordic pantheon. And we shall resolve ourselves to smash idolatry and not allow people to regard as divine that which is the work of their own hands, that gives them license to commit crime, but rather convey sentiments of an awe of a creator that is beyond the physical. And then we proceed to the prohibition against blasphemy, which euphemistically we shall refer as blessing the name of the Almighty, though if we were not euphemistic, it would mean the opposite, speaking disrespectfully towards heaven, and gain a resolve to be opposite the Nazi regime, which trampled on Torah scrolls and burned down synagogues and pulled beards of Jews who had beards because of their charge from the Torah, to be antithetical to a regime that hated morality and conscience and viewed them as ploys of the weak. And therefore we shall be the opposite in a path that has an awe and respect for the name of the Creator. And we proceed to the next of the 7 universal commandments we'll discuss, the prohibition against sexual immorality, and resolve to appreciate the sanctity of the family unit. Because where there is appreciation for the sanctity of the family and the bond between husband and wife, there is appreciation for the dignity of each nation. And in the promiscuous and amoral minds of the Nazis, families could be broken up and husbands separated from wives and parents from their children. But in the minds of those who have an awe for the sanctity of the family unit and the bond between husband and wife, they will create civilizations which build up families and communities. We proceed to appreciate the prohibition against thievery, against stealing, and to have an awe and appreciation and fear for the sanctity of appreciating the right of other people not to have their money and belongings taken unduly, and realize that the Nazi regime plundered their victims, motivated hardened criminals to put on their uniforms and insignias for the lust and greed of taking other people's things. From the top of the Nazi regime, Yamach Shemam, may their names be blotted out, to the lowest thugs in the regime, thievery was rampant. Leaders of the regime, like Göring, Hermann Göring, who amassed great wealth from plundered Jewish estates, to SS workers in concentration camps who pulled gold teeth from victims' mouths in order to enrich themselves. Lust for money and amoral greed were a major catalyst in the rise and sustaining of the Third Reich in Germany. And now we focus on the next of the 7 universal commandments, the prohibition of eating an Aver min achai, a living limb from an animal. That there is an appreciation that each human being has a spark of the divine in their soul, and the Creator has charged that certain foods not be ingested by the human being in order that the sanctity of his soul be spared of improper contaminations. And further, that the respect of the lower creatures, such as animals, be maintained. And therefore man is prohibited from eating a live limb off an animal. And when we appreciate that man has a spark of the divine in his soul, and that it has certain sensitivities and dignities, and appreciate that there should be an appreciation for all the lower beings as well, we will further distance ourselves from the path of barbarism perpetrated by the Nazi regime. May their names be blotted out. And so we have hopefully gained a clarity in the paths of good and evil, the path of monotheistic morality and divine law against the path of polytheism and relative morality. And we have 7 specific mitzvahs to focus on. And the belief in God above us, setting the tone for it all. The commandment for all mankind to have systems of justice, to enforce law. The prohibition of murder, the prohibition of idolatry, the prohibition of blasphemy, the prohibition of sexual immorality, the prohibition of thievery, and the prohibition against eating the limb off a live animal. And through these paths, we can all walk together to choose good. And as we're on that path, we'll have a resolve to oppose evil. And in the theme of what goes on today in the news with these acts of vandalism against the camps, we'll stand together with resolve to preserve these places of importance. And there should be a dignity for the thesis, statement, the final words of the Jewish victims in these camps, the 6 million Jewish victims who almost all left this earth saying, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Listen, nation Israel, Hashem, God who governs with compassion, is the God who all mankind ultimately recognizes as their ruler with perfect justice. He is one. He is the one God that does kindness and justice for all the creation. We should take these images to give us this resolve, together walk on these paths for good to the ultimate return of the third temple and the redemption of mankind quickly.